Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we begin a 3-day program on the wisdom of the elder woman, how women of mature age can embody wisdom in a way that can inspire themselves, their communities, their families. And so that'll be our program over the next 3 days. Before we launch into that, I want to just pause and note that yesterday was Universal Children's Day. And that day, normally I kind of blow past it, but as you know, as we've been tracking the developments in Iran and a number of children that have been killed, particularly young women, and girls, I thought it would be worth just noting that a little boy named Keon, 10 years old, was playing on Friday. He was considered a very precocious little boy. He lived with his family in Tehran. He was interested in robotics. He was inventing all kinds of little things and was looking forward to a career and his studies as a scientist. His family got into the car. They were driving and reached a roadblock. And the police told him to turn around because there were protests down the road. So the father was driving, the mother was in the passenger seat, and little Keon and sibling was in the back seat. So they turned the car around, and then the morality police, for reasons that remain unexplained, shot the father. I looked in the back seat, saw Keon, and shot him in the heart, and he was killed instantly. What made it an agony is the father was taken to the hospital, and the police said to the mother that if she told the truth about what happened, they would kill the father in the hospital and kill her other child. And when I heard that, knowing that it was Universal Children's Day, it kind of broke my heart at the suffering that is going on in that country. And then I did something that just intuitively made sense. I thought, why don't I look up how many children have been killed by guns in the United States just since January of 2022. So over the last 11 months, what's the number of children that have been killed due to guns? So I looked up the Gun Violence Archive, which updates on a minute-by-minute basis the number of killings. There have been 603 mass shootings in the United States just in 2022. That's more than 2 a day. And a mass shooting is defined as a shooting that involves the death or injury of at least 4 people. Children from infancy to age 11, there have been 289 American children that have been killed in the last 11 months. 634 have been injured. Children between 12 and 17, there have been 1,208 killed by guns, and 3,382 that have been injured. So in the United States, there have been nearly 1,500 children under the age of 17 that have been killed by guns since January 1st, 2022. Take that in just for a moment as we honor Universal Children's Day, and we get a measure of the suffering in our world, and the importance of moral maturity, the importance of vision, the importance of compassion. We're killing each other in unprecedented numbers. And one of the extraordinary statistics that I hadn't even taken in till I started to research it yesterday and today, that there's 39,000 deaths, if you include everyone, children and adults. And of that 39,000, 17,000 are through someone shooting someone else, but 21,000 are due to using guns on oneself in suicide. So that more people are committing suicide by guns than killing other people by guns in the United States. So I just wanted to bring that note in as we contemplate the complexity of our reality. We'll turn to the embodiment of the wisdom of the elder woman with this level of compassion in our hearts for children. Let us pause and engage in our coherence breathing in the midst of everything that we have to take in. Probably the most important thing that we can do together is simply to breathe in a coherent way. And the breathing that we do on Humanity Rising each day as we begin our sessions is a very ancient practice known for thousands of years, but it's also been identified by modern science as probably the most effective way to bring coherence to your entire body system, and in particular, coherence between your brain and your heart, instigating emotional calm while activating your mental acuity. So we're going to breathe in the following way. You're going to hear the sound of a bell. Just breathe in just very slowly. For 5.5 seconds, you'll hear another bell. Then you'll exhale for 5.5 seconds, and we'll do it for 10 breaths. If you inhale and exhale for 5.5 seconds, you breathe 5.5 times in a minute, and you bring in 5.5 liters of air. It's about as perfect a way to breathe in a regulated way as is possible. And that's what instills and engenders the coherence that we need to face some of these harsh realities, but also the opportunities of every crisis for personal growth and compassionate service into the world. So thank you, everyone, for joining this session of Humanity Rising. Let us just breathe together now, and we'll embark on our program. thank you, everyone. It's always good to breathe together. As we begin, I just want to note
Jim,
that
you're on mute.
Ada Merriweather has a birthday today. And so, Ada, I want to just salute you. You're one of our elder women as we embark on a 3-day program about the wisdom of elder women. I'd like to now introduce Mary Frances Drake, who is the convener of this 3-day program. She's been a professor of psychology at the University of Massachusetts at Lowell for 35 years, teaching psychology and really developing a body of work on how women in particular, as they mature, can embody the kind of women spirituality and the women wisdom that allows them to become elder women and crones and sages. She's also a spiritual counselor. She's been a priest and recently a bishop in the Christian mystical tradition. She's written a number of books and has really spent her life professionally in the realm of psychology, motivating and exploring the psychological pathways of women as they mature into the wisdom of the age. So, Mary Frances, I want to welcome you, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning, everyone. Well, it's morning where I am. I'd like to just take a moment to go back to that resonant breath for a moment, because what we heard this morning about the deaths of children and deaths in general by guns is a phenomena that I think really speaks to what we need in our culture in terms of women coming of age and taking on the wisdom of elderhood. It probably wasn't noted in those statistics that most of the people who kill themselves with guns are men, and most of the people who kill other people with guns are men. Not all, but most. And I think that reflects in our society the imbalance of the masculine patriarchal mode and what we can bring to bear on that with the rise of the feminine and the rise of wisdom in elder women. So I'd like you to come with me now and take a breath and put your hand on your heart and tune back into the resonance that was created by that breathing together, that coherent field that we create together. And then for each of you, whether you're male or female, however you identify yourself, with the goodness of your human heart, across that field of resonance, along with connecting, we can send compassion, prayer, attention, intention, light, love, whatever it is that your heart is moved to send across that coherent field toward all of those who have suffered from such atrocities, both the victims and the perpetrators who are in such a state that they could do those kinds of things, kill people or kill themselves. And the wisdom of the feminine is always about connected compassion. So we can breathe into our hearts, feel the angst and the agony of those things that happen in our world, and breathe out love and kindness, comfort and compassion towards those who have suffered from those things, and towards the mind of the world that needs to be transformed and healed in order that these types of things don't continue to occur. So breathe with me now, breathing into your heart the pain of those experiences, the heartache that Jim spoke of, letting your heart be broken by those things. And then through your own being, gathering up your attention and intention and breathing out into that coherent field that we've created. Love, light, forgiveness, healing, peace, bliss, all of the qualities of the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. And so not only experiencing, but changing that field for ourselves and for our world. And as we deposit our own intention from our heart into that coherent field, we change the timbre of it, we change the vibration of it. And so we can make a change by our collective intention. So we have 105 people here today, and that is quite a magnification of the collective intention for compassion. So breathing in again, feeling the heartache, being willing to let your heart be broken, and breathing out, blessing the world with your intention for the more beautiful world. And again, one more time, breathing in the pain, the suffering, the grief and loss, and breathing out the compassion and love, forgiveness, mercy, grace, comfort. And then take a moment to come back to your heart. You put your hand on your heart. When we talk about embodying the wisdom of the feminine, we really mean that word into your own physical being, where your physical being and your spiritual being meet at the heart center, feeling yourself and drawing all of your energy to yourself for this session, where we'll be talking about looking at what happened to us as women, what kind of society we live in, and how that reflects on the way that elder women are treated and seen, and what we need to do to change that. So gathering yourself together into the heart center, the representative of the feminine, and taking a moment to bow to that part of yourself and to that part in everyone who's gathered here, and all those who will see this video later, that we remember that we're one consciousness, one mind, in many different unique and beautiful forms, and that many, many of us are suffering. And now let's just breathe out the heaviness of that, because part of the process of being willing to have your heart broken by sorrow is to increase the amount of energy and power and concentration towards making change. So when I was considering with my 35 years of experience teaching psychology in women, spirituality, I worked for over a decade in hospice care, working with death and dying, as a social worker and as a chaplain, my ministry work. So all of those things have come together for me in watching over these 35 years, the change, the shift in our culture, how women are seen and how women are aging, how they're supported in aging or not. And when I was thinking about this, I thought about the word psyche. So psychology is the study of the psyche, and the word psyche in Greek means life, soul, mind, and breath. So that's a very interesting definition of psyche. So when we think about that, what I want to do in these 3 days is talk about those 4 aspects of our being and how they've been impacted by the current culture, and how we can transform, transcend, or overcome that influence in order to embody the wisdom that we have on the inside, which is where we find the wisdom of our being, on the inside. Most of the systems in our world have made it so that women either forget those things, or they're struggling so much to survive that they don't have the opportunity to investigate them, to dive into them. So let's take a look at each of those. When I talk about life, I'm talking about physical life, about our body. So the experience of the body, of being born a woman in our culture, in the Western culture, in many cultures around the world, is that generally speaking, cultures have been more prone to wanting boy children than girl children. We know that from lots of history in China and other places where they're preferred. And even my own experience, I have 3 children. And when I was pregnant with my 3rd child, my then mother-in-law said, "Oh, it's going to be a boy. We only have boys in this family." And I thought, what an interesting thing to say. And she's probably the last person I want to tell what the gender of my child is, as if that's the most important thing. So remembering that from very early on, the female body and the female being has been categorized as less than, and then also treated as property, both in the form of the oppression of women and girls, but also in the form of abuse. So because women tend to be generally less physically strong than men. They tend to be more oppressed and physically abused than men. So I want to say here at the outset that I'm not excluding men from any of these experiences. I'm just focusing on the female right now, the feminine, those who consider themselves women, girls and women. So in terms of the body, the statistics are still abysmal that about 3 out of 4 children, girl children and women, are in some way sexually or physically abused, molested, raped, beaten, 3/4 of women. Now, as I've been teaching my psychology and women class over these years, I asked students to write about their life. They write a personal narrative, which is a psychological tool for reviewing your life and seeing what happened to you and what did you do with it, what patterns did it set up in your life, and what will you do now that you know that that's the case. So we'll be doing that over these 3 days with the 50s through 80s decades. But for all these years I've been teaching, what I see is that many, if not most, of the female students that I have had some kind of abuse, some kind of offense, aggression, violation against them. So you can imagine, psychologically speaking, that creates a trauma in childhood, which carries throughout life until someone gets to this place where they have the support needed and the opportunity needed to heal from that and to go on exploring who they are or who they were before that happened, so that they can come into their own experience of their own life free from the imposition of trauma that's happened in their life. So physically speaking, that's one of the issues for women. And then we think about the cycle, the physiological cycle of womanhood, of being female. So as a girl child, you might know the maiden mother crone kind of typology for female development that has to do with our blood cycles or blood mysteries. So as a maiden, a young girl, we go through childhood at the mercy of those around us. I remember Oprah Winfrey in her role in The Color Purple said, a girl child ain't safe in a family of men. And that's really the truth for a lot of girls. So you get through childhood, maybe having some kind of trauma, and then you come to menarche, which is the beginning of the menses, the beginning of women's period, the first blood mystery. And then you go into this stage of mother, where you can now create children in your body. You can grow a child inside of you. And that becomes the focus of the next section of life. And that is pretty celebrated, more so for the child that you're bringing into the world than that you're able to bring a child into the world. So that's an interesting quandary to be in. Both of those things have been fairly medicalized in our society. The whole connectivity that women generally had in past cultures to gather around one another, to raise up a girl child into a woman, to offer a rite of passage during the time of menarche, to welcome a girl child into womanhood, to help her know how to relate to men, how to relate to partners, how to carry and give birth and raise children. That has disintegrated a lot because people move far away from their villages, from their people. And so many, many people are doing this by themselves. I recently, this year, a niece of mine had a child, and she was living in Germany by herself with her husband. And I happened to be traveling in the UK at the time. And she called me every day about her child and about her newborn and how the nursing was troublesome for her. And she didn't know about the sleeping patterns. And she had no one there with her that could be walking her through that. And I happily did that for her. And having been the first in my extended family to breastfeed my children, I was able to help her with that, although that's another phenomenon that was taken away from women, I should say, natural experience, the natural experience of childbirth and the natural experience of feeding your child. The medicalization of those things pathologizes them. And so if being female becomes pathologized, say in menarche with PMS, which used to be considered a psychological disorder in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Psychology, or the issues of pregnancy or giving birth, which became medicalized and often resulted in male doctors cutting women open to bring babies into the world rather than having the natural process of the body. And I do know that, I had all three of my children with home birth midwives. And so I do know that we've reclaimed some of that. But generally speaking, women in the world are very much at the mercy of the medical system, which is still very patriarchally run, and also considers itself the knower. So the feminine instinct, the feminine experience of these things becomes secondary to an external authority, which is the knower, the masculine patriarchal knower in the medical industry, in academia, in the church. So everywhere you look, these structures are telling women you're less than. You belong to someone else. Your body doesn't belong to you. I mean, even in today's world, with Roe versus Wade being turned over, we're starting to lose once again the ability to have the right to have make our own decisions about our own bodies. So these are the kinds of cultural things that have been instilled in us and internalized by us, so much so that young girls and women call their menses time the curse, rather than in indigenous cultures where it was a time of wisdom. It was a time of going in, separating from everyday life, going in, understanding that there is an innate wisdom in the woman that comes to the fore during that moon time and informs us about ourselves, our relation to the world, so that we can be in right relationship, both internally and externally. And it brings us to the place where we can then speak the truth from that internal knowing, which generally gets dismissed or disregarded from the external masculine mind. And that internal knowing tells us what's true. And it makes us somewhat fiery about speaking what's true. And sometimes those in authority, generally the masculine, don't want to hear that. And so then they diminish or trivialize that. Oh, you're just PMSing. So these cycles that are part of the richness of being female get usurped and put back on us in a way that makes women feel ashamed or out of control or crazy. And so then building up that, under oppression, pressure happens and that builds up. And so at the time of the moon time, that comes to the surface and it becomes a fury. It becomes intense. It becomes urgent. And so that time of the month for women is a time where they can finally say enough is enough. And unfortunately, because women have been hobbled by these internalizations of being less than, we've not been able to say enough is enough. We've been killed for saying enough is enough. Like the young women that Jim was talking about in Iran, they are killed for saying enough is enough over and over and over again. And the more the feminine speaks up, the more intense is the pressure to push it back down. So this is just the body. But by the time we get through giving birth to children, raising children, which most women have lots of accolades for in our culture, then we get to the point where we're at the empty nest. So at the end of our mothering time, there's generally a big gap in our culture about what happens after that. And that's why psychologically, the empty nest syndrome is such a big deal, because our sense of self in being a maiden, a young woman, maybe a sexual woman, going to being a mother and creating life and growing up life and sending them off. And then what? Then we just grow old. We can't create children anymore. Our sexuality changes. We get uppity. We speak out. We speak our truth. And the structures don't like that. And so dismissed. And so because of that, women have had to go underground or on the fringe to really go inside and find what is it that is true in my own being. What is it that is most important in terms of living my own truth in my own life, and where does that truth come from? So the women's way of knowing is much more intuitive and internal and feeling, sensing, physical than the masculine way of knowing, which is more cerebral, more mental. So that also gets diminished. It's called, women's intuition. It's not fact. It's feelings. It's not fact. And also that it can't be proven. And recently, so I've been teaching this psychology in women class for a long time from a very feminine perspective of teaching women to gather their own intuitive nature, figure out what happened to them what they did with it, and then going into their own nature to say, what now? What will I do now? And so in that time, I've been teaching using a couple of different books. One is The Personal Narrative, which is a narrative tool, write your story of your life, learn from it, grow from it, heal from it. And the other one is Jungian stories from Clarissa Pinkola Estes, the Women Who Run with the Wolves, which has to do with stories that tell us the archetypes of being a woman in the culture and how to do that, and what are the traps and potholes that one might come up against. And in internalizing those, we get to have a kind of a roadmap, which used to be given to us by our elder women. And so with a culture where fewer and fewer women come into the wisdom of their elderhood, really embodying it, really being it for the next generation, then that generation flounders. And there's a very interesting example of this. So it is true that the next generations, I was born in 1964, I'm 58, and the next generations I've seen over the past 30 years are starting to make more room for themselves, speak up more at younger ages, which I think is fantastic. But recently I went to a group that is in my community that was a group of young mothers, either women who had babies or were pregnant or were hoping to be pregnant. And it was an intergenerational gathering. So as women do, they gather, they bring food, they talk. And then there was a circle. And in the circle, I was the only woman, post-menopausal woman, so the only elder woman in the room. And all of these young women who all fantastically had all chosen to have home births for their children, the people around that they want to be around, creating a natural and supported environment for bringing a child into the world with, of course, the backup of the medical industry if needed. And when they came around the circles for my turn to speak, what I said to them was, what you don't know about what's coming is that now that you're creating a new wave of, I get to do this my way. When you get to my age, a great deal of freedom comes from caring about other people's ways. And we have our way come from the inside out. And I told them that this is the most powerful and free, liberating time of a woman's life, because when our menses dry up, all of that wisdom is in us all the time. So rather than having a moon time where things come to the surface, things are always there. There's insight, there's deep seeing into things, there's knowing that is there and available all the time if we tap into it. And these young women, all in their late 20s to mid 30s, they were shocked. And they said to me, these are educated, intelligent, very in tune women. They said, oh, thank you for saying that. I thought that when I got to that age, my life would be over. And that is indicative of the way the culture has treated the crone, wise woman, elder woman, including the way our bodies are treated. So a young woman's body is revered in our culture, no question about that, and actually imposed that you're meant to look young for your whole life. You're meant to look a certain way in order to be valuable. And that mostly has to do with sexuality, even though women's sexuality has been maligned as well. So you can't, there's that, the virgin and the whore dichotomy, like you can't really let yourself be yourself. So there's so many, I hope you're getting the feeling here, so many ways that the feminine gets pushed down. And this is just talking about the physical. So then when you get to menopause and you are no longer able to create children, which seems to be in our culture's idea of the apex of the feminine expression. I love my children. I have 3 children in their 20s. They're beautiful people. I'm very happy to be a mother, but that's not the only part of me. And so as a 58-year-old going through menopause, then I have to think, now what? And our culture doesn't leave a lot of now what. It leaves now what in the competitive way, like you can go on to do things that compete with the masculine model, but not now what in the feminine way. And so that's why things like Humanity Rising or Ubiquity are important, because they're breaking out of the mold of let's keep doing it the same way, hoping for different results, which is, by the way, what Carl Jung calls the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So we have to do things differently. So I've always had elder women as my guides and teachers and friends. I have women speaking this week. So my friend Cara, who is going to be speaking with us today about her experience of this journey, is 62. Tomorrow, a woman named Caitlin, who's also an author, she is 73. And on Wednesday, Carolyn North is 84, will be 85 very soon. And I wanted to represent each of those decades because there is hardly any study about those ages in terms of what is possible or the highest ideal of self-actualization or fulfillment in those years for women, even though many, many women have done wonderful, astounding things in those years. But culturally speaking, it's not really, you kind of get old, you're no longer attractive, you kind of go away quietly, maybe be a grandma, but not in the sense of a wise woman in your family that your children give their children to learn, but in the sense of, grandma comes and bakes cookies or something like that. And then eventually you get old enough where you're put somewhere because women outlive men by quite a lot, statistically, and then kind of forgotten and just people are waiting for you to die because that's what you do. You get old and you die. Now, I am speaking in generalizations, I understand, and probably many of the people here who come to Humanity Rising, I'm likely preaching to the converted already, but I want to say it so that other people who maybe you pass this along to can get the picture of like what it's been like. Now that's just the body. So life, soul, mind, and breath, the soul, the heart and soul of the person, also diminished in our culture. We're having to reclaim the ability to give credence to what we feel, what's inside of us. Now, of course, we know that we have to clear out and clean up and heal from the things that happen to us in order to get to the truth of our own voice. But that process requires that we say what happened and that we get help healing from what happened. And then we go back to our own innocence and say, who am I really? And what am I here to do? Why am I on the planet at this time? And then we can go on to fulfill that with some age and wisdom. In some indigenous cultures, they don't call a person an adult until they're 50, which is a really interesting thing to contemplate. So the soul voice is the still small voice, and it gets louder as we get older, or it should get louder as we get older. But sometimes people are downtrodden or disheartened, and they don't think they have any value left. My own mother, who's 74, said to me recently, well, during COVID, she's like, it's all right if I die during COVID. I'm in the waiting room anyway. And I thought she could live another decade or more being in the waiting room for death. And I thought, what a sad thing to imagine has to be your plight in when you're still alive and viable. She's cognitively and physically fit. So the aged, the postmenopausal woman physically is looked at as not useful, as growing older, maybe getting a little crazy, maybe getting ugly, maybe getting cranky, and then dismissed. It's easy to dismiss that. So for women going through these ages, we have to reclaim our voice, reclaim our inner guidance, our inner compass, and speak the truth, speak truth to power so that we can live out the life that we came here to live out. And then the ones who follow us can have hope for being able to do that as well. And not have to think that their life is over when their children leave the nest, which is unfortunately the case for a lot of people. And a lot of women go into depression at that time because they don't know who they are in themselves apart from the role of mother. Excuse me. So the mind is an interesting thing. Our culture has made the mind and the cognition or intelligence or the brain the same thing. But if we look at the mind, here's a place that we often go to. Our forehead is where our executive function is. And here is the place of wisdom, the place of intuition, right? The pineal and pituitary gland, place of wisdom. I'm just going to interrupt here to say, I know that many of you are writing chats. I really can't keep track of those while I'm speaking. So I hope that you'll hold those questions for the end so that if you have questions or comments that we can revisit them at the end, okay? So because most of psychology now looking at the psyche from this perspective of the brain, the mind and the brain, not so much the unconscious, not so much the psyche as in soul, then everything is being quantified and we're describing things in a way that is quantitative rather than qualitative. And so most of psychology has become the science of psychology and not the art of psychology, which is a whole deeper, Freudian, Jungian, Rogerian kind of direction to look into. Like, there's more to this life than just what our brain chemistry does. And modern psychology, unfortunately, and psychiatry has moved towards diagnosing and prescribing medications for disorders. So pathologizing the experiences that we have in the mind and then trying to medicate them so they stop, without looking more deeply into why it is that we have those things. Why do we have depression more in women than in men? Why do we have anxiety? And if you think about what I just told you, of course, women would be anxious and depressed. So when I hear young women saying, I'm anxious or I'm depressed or I have anxiety, I say, well, of course you do. Look at the culture you live in. Look at the world we live in. Look at what Jim just told us. Who wouldn't be depressed that children are being killed all over the world? Who wouldn't be depressed that people are being shot down? 630 some mass murders in our country in 1 year, not even a year. Who wouldn't be depressed about that? We would have to push that back from us in order to pretend that life is normal. This is not normal. This is a catastrophe. This is chaos. And the only way out of it is to rise up into that truth with enough people creating that voice in the resonant, coherent field, saying, no more, enough is enough. And wisdom speaking that voice. There's another way of doing these things, and we can reimagine and recreate, use all that creative energy of the feminine to create the more beautiful world that we know is possible. And keeping our sights on that, not ignoring that there's pain, not ignoring that there's dysfunction in our culture and in the world, but saying we know it can be better. And that transformation has to happen not only in our own beings, first of all, but also in our communities, and then in our institutions. And those are kind of like dinosaurs. They're hard to crack. I've been working in academia for 35 years. It's hard to crack. They're still wanting me to use an empirical textbook in an experiential class about the psychology of women. So that's still happening in every industry, still happening in medicine, still happening in media, everywhere you look. So this is our dilemma, is that we have to recreate and re-inspire, which means to breathe in, re-inspire the wise woman inside of us and get our body to come alive with that wisdom. I happen to be taking a class right now as part of my doctoral program at UU. I'm doing a doctor of ministry by Sharon Blackett. It's called Haggitude, which I really love. Whoops, I don't know if you can see that. Haggitude. Highly recommend this, reimagining the second half of life. And she's talking about similar things, but talking about how we can come back around to ourselves. So as a 58-year-old postmenopausal, I've spent a lot of time saying, like, what is it that this time of life is meant to be about? Certainly sending my children off to their lives, and then looking back to say, what do I have to offer? What do I have to offer now? And not just about me. A lot of people are talking about, like, I'm going to retire and it's all going to be about self-care and playing tennis and having lunch and things. But what am I here to do beyond? Not besides having children, as if that's not important, but beyond that, as the wise woman and mother of all children, mother of the world. How do I take on the mother energy of the earth and get people to restore their sanity about taking care of the mother that we live on, taking care of the mother that is in front of us? Recently, I've invited, with a friend of mine, some elder women to live together in a place that we're calling, at the moment, we have several names for it, the Queen Mother's Home, that's my name for it, and the Sacred Home. And what we're doing is having women of a certain age, we have two 70-somethings and an 84-year-old, living together in a dignified situation, in a shared situation where we can respect and gather the wisdom of these wise women, these aged women who have lived a long time through a lot of history and who have had experiences different from ours. And that wisdom and that gold is so important for us to glean and to say, how can we use the wisdom of their age and their experience and their knowing in turning towards the younger generations to help them turn toward creating a more beautiful world? So that is the job of the elder woman, is to speak truth to power, to say when enough is enough, to know what's true inside of themselves and trust it. And many, many, many institutions in our world try to convince women that they are not trustworthy, that inside of them is not trustworthy, or maybe it's even evil, as we know from the whole witch hunt and all of that, right? So life, soul, mind, and breath. Breath is, inspiration, taking in the spirit. So the inspiration, the breath, is the spiritual energy that we have access to. Now, much of our religious world has been about going out to find the God outside of us, or something like that, and turning against the coherent field that indigenous cultures and pagan cultures had, earth worshiping cultures had. So it's not that is necessarily a negative thing, although it's turned to be negative. But the job of being in a body is to embody the spirit in the flesh, to get it to come down, to get the wisdom of the spirit to enliven the flesh. And so that's a whole area that's completely left out of psychology in terms of the academic study of psychology, because it can't be quantified in the same way and can't be proven in a way that the masculine executive function rational mind has decided is the only way we can have truth. So if we say there's another way to truth, there's another form of truth, there are other kinds of intelligence, and it's not irrational to put credence into those intelligences, it is non-rational. It's a very important thing to remember. Non-rational does not equal irrational. So taking back the idea that, yes, science tells us lots of fantastic things. I'm a lover of science. I follow quantum physics. It's like my favorite thing to watch. But that whole idea of quantum physics is doing exactly the same thing, turning us back towards ourselves. Where does truth lie? Here. All of it's one, and each of us is important in that. So it can't be a competitive program, because nobody wins unless everybody wins. And that is the nature of bringing this consciousness of the feminine, the crone, the hag, the wise woman, back to the earth, back to a place of honor, back to a place where it's listened to. In some indigenous cultures, there were elder women who sat on a committee that all the young people came to get wisdom, and those women would say, when enough is enough. They're like, don't do that now. So it's not that they were taking away choice. They were the guardians to say when enough is enough. So that's what we've lost. And what we find instead is that we see how far we've gone when no one's saying enough is enough. Now, I don't mean no one, of course. I had the great delight in my 20s to be in the company of Gloria Steinem. I listened to her speak, and then I got to have lunch with her, a private lunch with a few people. And I remember being in awe of her because she was about my age when she was speaking, and she stood and spoke eloquently for a very long time. And I thought, wow, maybe someday I'll be able to teach like that. And then she said something to me directly. I told her what I was doing on my campus, and I'm trying to get young women involved. And she said, just remember, you don't have to do it alone. And that was very profound for me, because as someone raised up in the masculine, independent, competitive culture, I was just going to go out there and forge a new way. And what I realized is one of the other things that have been taken from women and has affected the psyche of women is that we have had our communities and our collective broken apart. And this insidious beauty contest and competition that makes women not trust each other has diminished the power of the feminine. The feminine are the weavers of the coherent field. We hold that together. That's what the feminine does. And so if we're splintered, then that power is greatly diminished, because the power of the feminine is the power of connection. Connection, compassion, and wisdom coming from the inside. And you get a lot of wise women around, and there's a lot of strong female power, but with the understanding that we're doing that in order to come together to create something that everyone can be safe, seen, included, and supported in. So as we're looking at these ages, the things that have impacted us. What I'd like to do really quickly is show you from my perspective as a 50-something. One thing that I did recently, which was I participated in a portrait series by a friend of mine who is a portrait photographer. Her name is Mondi Mitchell. Excuse me. And she did a series called Unforgettable, the Over 50 Revolution. So she did a whole very cool process where she has the women who want to do this come in, and she interviews you and she asks you, what is it that you want to accomplish with these photos? So I was thinking about that, and I let myself go through the process of, okay, I'm a woman of a certain age. I'm not young. I'm not thin. I'm not, beautiful in the Hollywood sense. And that doesn't mean I don't feel beautiful. It just means that's the, external reality. And so I said, what do I want to portray as a 58-year-old? And so I decided there were three things I wanted to do. I wanted to have a professional photo for my professional life as a spiritual director and counselor, as an author. So that was one goal. I wanted to reclaim my feminine body at this age and say, I'm still a woman, still a sexual being, still a woman who has something to offer, has some attractive energy, not necessarily for the same reason that, Hollywood looks at those things, but just saying women are still women, regardless of the age and shape of their form, how much gray hair they have, how many wrinkles, etc. And then the third thing I wanted to do was talk about myself as a bishop in my tradition, the female spiritual authority, which is really diminished, in every religious tradition, almost every single religious tradition. There are few or no women at the top of those spiritual hierarchies. And almost in almost all of them, they are denied access to that level of spirituality. So I would like to show you this series of I'm going to share my screen with you for a moment. So this is one of the things that I thought was very important to do. I think this is the one. Let me see. Sorry about that. I have to find the right page. Okay. I'm going to find another way to get you there. So in that series, what I was looking to do is reclaim those parts of myself, and also to say that the blog that Mondi did, which I hope that you can see on your screen now. There we go. Had to do with asking women of a certain age, of the 50s and over, what they have to share with the women following them in age. So these first pictures are the mood board that we put together, and I chose some images from history, some artwork, and some beings that I am fond of, like Joan of Arc and La Maja Desnuda. And so we chose these boards, and then this is me getting ready for the photo shoot, which I've never done before, which is quite an interesting experience. And then here, which some of you have seen before, is one of the photos reclaiming my physical form as a 58-year-old woman. And when I showed this to people, there were lots of reactions to this. But my hope was to recognize that being a midlife woman, being on the verge of elderhood, is a beautiful thing, because you get past some of the self-consciousness and the facade that we put on for other people, and our wisdom comes to the forefront. And so this is the self-confidence and the part of us that can be seen as powerful. Powerful in the sense of not caring what other people think and not caring about the society. And then this was part of the bishop program to say the feminine and the spiritual do not have to be separate. It doesn't have to be a collar and a crozier. And this is my symbol for the feminine bishop. You might have seen Catholic bishops, all men who wear the hat and the crozier and all the robes. And I thought this was much more in line with what it feels like to be a female bishop, which is part of the earth expressing through the physical form of the feminine. And then this is a closer one of that same thing, which will probably be on my next book. And I was talking to young women about how do you find a woman who has these qualities, or how do you become that woman for yourself? And I didn't include here, it's not included here, some of the photos of my business photos, but I'm working on my new website right now. So at some point you'll have access to those as well. So let me get back to all of you. All right. So that is, for me, as a 58-year-old, how I am processing this postmenopausal time in my life and taking this class called Haggitude, which I think is a riot to call it Haggitude, because there is a certain power and attitude to saying, I am confident, I have earned my stripes, I know who I am, I know what I want, I know why I'm here, and I'm going to go about the business of doing that. And making space in the culture to let people know that that is something that is a good thing to do. It is not arrogant or unseemly for a woman to say, here I am, I know who I am. I am no longer defined by the external things that have tried to define and imprison me in my life. So we're getting close to our hour mark. So I would like to invite the Right Reverend Cara Cairo, who is a good friend of mine, also a bishop, to come in and speak with you. She's my representative of the 60s at 62 years old, and also a bishop, also a business owner, and a lesbian woman who's had a very different experience of life than I have. And so I'd like her to share for a little bit her experience of the barriers in life, soul, mind, and breath, physical, mental, emotional, heart things, and spiritually, that have tried to stop her. And they have been unsuccessful, I'm happy to report. But I'll turn it over to you, Cara, if you'd like to speak for a few moments, and I can also, chime in as you need me to. So if you want to take yourself off mute and go ahead.
Thank you. Hello to everybody. Can't see you, but you're there, I know. Well, I'm really honored and humbled to that you asked me to come and share a little bit of my life and what's going on, and my journey and where I am now. And so, wow, I mean, I think when you were speaking about like how life should have been for and growing up as a young girl and a woman, how it could have been in, being taught and being learning how special and how powerful we are, and not having our power taken away from us at a very, very early age, as a whole one part of the human experience, and men have that also, but we're talking about women. And so of course I've experienced many times in my life when I've been dismissed or made to feel less than, being lesbian. When it would have been nice to know earlier than I did, which that again, is being encouraged by younger, with the younger generation now, to be able to express themselves as being free, or whoever they identify with. So and I think that's a great thing, and it would have been wonderful to be able to know that while I was growing up, and be able to embrace it. But that being said, that didn't happen. So through life's, my journey was, a little bit difficult, as most people's journey is growing up. And so I think now it's like being a part of learning from you and being a part of our group, and learning that it's okay to own my my aging life as it is just an amazing door that's been opened to me. And I just I'm really starting to feel that. Like I think about myself, when I think about myself, I think about myself as being young. Like I really do. I think about myself as I'm very young at heart. But now I'm really owning my age and really cherishing where I am in life right now. Not, and like you were saying, like I'm owning my body. I'm not have to worry about being thin or what I eat or, looking beautiful or in the world's eyes. Again, as you said, I feel beautiful and I don't need anybody to tell me that. But so it's just I find every single minute of every single day is an amazing journey for me right now. And owning the wisdom that I've earned throughout my whole 63 years. So, and it's a funny thing I wanted to say, there's something that's been happening to me in the last couple of days. So I have an uncle that's visiting me for Thanksgiving, and he is 77. So I went to pick him up at the airport Saturday, and pretty much the first thing he said to me as he got into my car, he said, so Deb, he said, live life right now, live it while you can. You're still young. And, because when you get to be in your 70s, life is over pretty much. Right. So I was laughing. I'm like, wow, like that's kind of crazy. But yeah, I listened to my elders. So I took it to heart or whatever, and thinking about it. And I thought it was curious. Of course, he doesn't really know how I feel. And I am living my life right now. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I have another friend. And so, and it was quite funny yesterday because we went up to the theater to go see a show. And so my other friend is, she's 73. And all I've been hearing from her lately is, like, oh, I've just realized that I need to, start living. My life is limited now. And I just, and so I was sitting in the car with the two of them, and I was just like, you guys, you are so, like, it's just so curious to me that they think their life is over pretty much, or beginning to end. And so that was, so I'm kind of making fun of them right now, but not only that, but yeah, so I'm reason why I'm saying that is that I don't feel like my life is over. I feel like I want to be able to embody my age, embody this person that I am right now, and also be able to give back to younger people, and be a source of whatever wisdom I can impart on younger women and men. So
can I ask you a question, Cara?
Sure.
As you were speaking, I was thinking about, since I do know some of your history, I was thinking about how it would be different for you as a lesbian woman than it was for me as a straight woman, and how you might speak that, I hate to say I'm putting you on the spot as a token lesbian, but I would like to say that there are a lot of young women who, although there is some freedom, I think, right now to be expressing our sexuality as we choose and our identifying ourselves as we choose, there's also a lot of pushback. And so I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, maybe a little bit about the pushback that you've had between family and church and other experiences, even the partner that didn't want to be, expressing that they were with you, that kind of thing, just like that part of your journey, which might be different than what I experienced.
Well, yeah, it was, when I realized I was a lesbian, it was like the whole world opened up to me. I was like, whoa, I didn't realize that this, because I was, pretty naive and growing up, and I didn't really have any older siblings or anybody to kind of guide me or tell me things. So when I realized that, I was like, wow, this is great. And I just, for the first example of what happened is, I came home, and like the first time I met another lesbian, I came home for dinner that night, and I was about 17, and I ended up sharing it at the dinner table and saying, wow, I met a lesbian today. And then they all looked at me like, oh no, and yeah. So then my dreams got squashed pretty quickly about what was, okay and what was not, and, was made to feel that, there was something wrong with me, and that this was a really bad thing. So it was very confusing, but I knew in my heart that it wasn't, that it was me. It was very strong. So I guess, I was lucky there, but I think as far as comparing it to maybe the way you were, or for a person that's quote unquote normal, that's a whole other thing that you don't have to deal with as far as being accepted. But and so I think for me, I never lost that hope or that passion. So but it was really difficult I would always say it wasn't, difficult, put on a strong face, but it was very difficult. And I saw, just recently, once I've done the work as an older woman and regaining my spirit and regaining my freedom, I realized how detrimental that was to me, to stuff that and to not really own it and to really be strong and seek out strength with someone that could, help me or, show me the way to do that. And I would, if I were going to tell somebody that now, I would say, find a group that is strong and sound and loving, that will, nurture your spirit and your life. Because when I lost my train of thought, and that's one thing that happens when you get to be 63 for sure. But another thing that happened to me, because of being a lesbian and owning that, I was told that I was raised Catholic, and I was told that that this was not okay, or that it was okay to be gay, but you just couldn't practice it. Like that was ludicrous for me to hear. But so I became very disillusioned with the religion that I was brought up in, and So, and that took its toll, because throughout the years I would always feel spiritual, but you know, I didn't feel accepted. And so, and in hindsight, realized that it really did a number on my lack of worth as a woman and as a human being, really. And so and for a lack of knowledge, like the way you were speaking about raising a female to be confident and to own your body and to own the things that happen to you, like your period, and you know, because I was maybe I dismissed myself because that's what I was hearing, you know, you're no good, you're not worth it. I mean, I remember I was in a relationship, and you know, and we had bought a house together, and you know, around me, I was young, I was 25, and so, and all around me, and as I was in this relationship, my siblings were all getting married conventionally, and we're having children and stuff. And I remember having my mother over for lunch one day, and I said to her, "Ma," I said, "Are you ever going to accept me or accept my relationship?" And she said, "No." I was like, "Oh." So, subsequently, I think that throughout my life, I've not chosen, like you're talking about, the last relationship I was in, where I actually basically chose somebody who would not be open about our relationship, you know, and that was just really, it was just an amazing thing. It wasn't amazing. It was very difficult. And why I put myself through that, I have no idea. But again, you know, not owning or being felt that I was not good enough or not worthy of love, or I had to accept this, you know, or just that's the way it would be. And that's, you know, was very sad. You know, it was a very sad situation to be in. So, but I'm not anymore. And it's, you know, my life has changed considerably. So
Can I ask you one more thing before we wrap up, Cara? So
sure.
in terms of your religious upbringing and your study and ordination as a priest and then as a bishop, like, you know, obviously the Catholic Church would hear nothing of all of that for you as a woman, much less a lesbian woman. So how have you chosen to handle that with people in your world in terms of, you know, who has access to that information about you or how you present yourself in that way?
Well, I never, it's not something that I aspired to ever be a priest or a bishop. And I never thought I would be on the road that I'm on. But, so I think getting to this place that I am right now, and all the work that I've done to come to this place spiritually, I've gotten to the point where I don't feel the need to explain myself to anybody. I've taken a vow to be in service to all of creation, and however that looks is what I'm going to fulfill. So if it means, and I've told quite a few people, like people in my inner circle know that I'm a priest, and some don't. but they kind of, I get the eye rolls sometimes about when I start to talk about something or spiritually, and they roll their eyes a little bit, but I don't care. And I just love them. So it's just a wonderful place to be. It's wonderful to have these gifts of the spirituality, especially now in my life. I feel like now I can finally live and finally be the person that I am, or was always meant to be, and I'm it's okay that it didn't happen sooner. It's okay because it happened right now. So, and I'm really grateful for that.
Thank you, Cara. Yeah. And, I think it is interesting, our different experiences, but what I heard you saying is that internalizing those things that were a lack of acceptance of those parts of yourself were really challenging. And I wanted to bring up to the folks listening that as we go through these days, I'm also going to be teaching a class in January about moving from midlife woman, which means an aging woman, to wise woman. And so this is the trajectory I hear you saying, like, you get to midlife, you figure out what's acceptable, what's not, and you figure out how to come into your own being nonetheless. And things like taking on spiritual authority, for example, or experiences that women have that other people don't understand or dismiss as crazy. For example, so I've written a book called Dancing in the Doorway, which is one of the books for my class there, Dancing in the Doorway. It's a life's journey between worlds, and it has a lot to do with the spiritual aspect of our feminine nature, which is not only intuitive, but also able to connect interdimensionally. So, for example, most of my life I've experienced talking to dead people, is what I call it, but having interdimensional experiences with people who have died, or with beings from other places, or beings that get called angels or saints or whatever from other times. And those are very, you have to be very cautious about talking like that. Because in academia, that would be dismissed immediately. In religion, that would be considered, heresy of some sort. That's why women got called witches. And in the world of psychology, that's called hysteria or delusion or something like that. And so just trying to reclaim those aspects of ourselves so that we know that all of our experiences brought us to this place where we have access to things that have real power in our lives, that all of culture has worked against and tried to suppress in us. So we don't own it. So we don't claim the truth of our nature and the truth of our experience. And that is something that has been very successful in the world, to minimize those things or pathologize them in a really serious way. I took a class with Stan Groff recently about the future of psychology. And that is, we have to bust open the psychological world as well as the religious and the medical worlds to say the feminine experience is different, and it's not just for women. Those aspects of our being are part of every human being, and part of the reason why the masculine has gone so far astray into toxicity, because it hasn't been valued in them either. So everyone suffers. Women have suffered from the oppression of it, but men have suffered from the absence of it. And so that's a restoration in everyone's being that we need to keep at the center of what we're doing in terms of claiming ourselves, and in terms of being an example of that for the next generations, and a helper, a helper getting people there. So I appreciate your sharing, Cara. And I want to say that a few things you may not know about the Right Reverend Cara Cairo is that she is a successful business owner and has been for many years. And she lives that vow of service. And even before she was ordained as a priest or bishop, has her whole life found people in need of a hand up, and has found ways to include them in her business world, so that they can find their way back to themselves and have the support that maybe she didn't have as a person in her life. And it's a very commendable way of serving your community and the world, by loving those who others have cast out. And I appreciate that about you, and I appreciate you being here today. I think we're going to turn it over to questions now. If people have questions, if you would be so kind as to raise your hand, and Cara and I can stay on to answer questions. Or I'm not sure if I can see you if you raise your hand, but questions and answers. There we go. Let's look at those. Okay. Okay.
Well, Mary Frances, maybe I
Yes.
could help out here.
Thank you. That would be good.
Those were the questions and answers were more of a technical nature about the chat. And one quick question that just popped in from Cherry Stover is, what denomination are you a priest in, Kara?
Christian mystic.
So both you and Mary Frances are part of the same denominational order.
Yes, we're yes, we have a group, and actually she ordained me.
Oh, cool.
Well, we're considered an independent ministry, and I came from a background, Christian mystic holy order that was not independent, which means when you became a priest, you had to vow obedience to your bishop and stay in that organization. And the particular holy order that I was involved in had a disagreement between the leaders, and it fell apart. And so, as I continued to do my ministry, people gathered who wanted to become ministers. And at the time I was a priest. And so I too wasn't looking to become a bishop, but I knew people who wanted to become deacons and priests. And so I found someone who would help me to get the ordaining rights to do that. And so then as people gathered, especially over COVID, online, a lot of people gathered and really tuned into the connectivity of the spiritual community. And some of them wanted to continue on to study and serve as ministers. So I call myself an accidental bishop because I didn't set about doing that to do that. But and like Kara, didn't have the intention of doing that. But it is a useful thing to have a format for raising people up in consciousness and clarity. Clearing out the things that keep us from being in service. So, yeah.
And just so people understand more, the Christian mystical tradition is essentially would be tracking the Christian mystics, the spirituality of the mystical strand of Christianity. Is that?
Well, true. I mean, tracking it, of course, because there are many beautiful examples, and many of them happen to be Catholic, because the Catholics saint people like that, and then you get to hear about them later, right? Now, there are lots of mystics in the world who aren't sainted and who aren't popular or famous. But really, mysticism means an experience of the divine from the inside. It means firsthand, direct experience of the divine. So the practices, like in many traditions of prayer and meditation and sacraments, are to move your consciousness inside. And so then the authority becomes the inner authority versus the outer authority. And that creates a lot of liberation in the spirit. And that's something that I think, I having gone to Chatra with you all, and also seeing what Ubiquity is doing and Humanity Rising is doing, is that's what we're lacking, is that consistent connected voice inside, from the inside, the divine in all of us saying, this is how to do it. This is how to live. This is how to love. And then bringing that to the world the way that all of the great saints and avatars and teachers of all traditions have done.
Yeah, beautiful. Now, Monica Plant is asking a question: where would be helpful places to look to find multicultural role models of middle-aged women who are positively visible, challenging the stereotypes of women at that age? That's a very important question, I think.
It is. And, it's one of the reasons I invited Kara as a lesbian woman, because I wanted to represent, that the LGBTQ plus community. And I have to say, the woman who's speaking on Wednesday, she is a Jewish woman from Russian Jewish descent, but she's also Caucasian. And tomorrow's person also Caucasian, which I know is a problem. And having lived and worked in an area where there isn't a lot of interracial life, I did have one Indian woman, but she was the wrong age category that might have spoken. And I think it's important when I teach this class online, for the university, I do take into account the intersectionality of people's experience. And it's very important to age, race, sexual orientation, gender expression. All of those things are important factors in part of the process of what happened to us. I think the healing part is similar, but it's coming from a different angle. And maybe of course, some people, for example, Kara being a white lesbian is different from me being a white straight woman, heterosexual. That's a different experience and compounding experience, actually. Same with, classism. There's so many factors in the intersectionality of oppression that make it a different experience, first of all, for each individual and religious background, all of that, but also, learning that about one another is eye-opening, because then it gives us a perspective for looking at, oh, what is it like for that person? And that also engenders compassion, that people have different experience and everyone's experience is important and everyone's trauma is real. And that's an important factor of inclusion, right? Compassion and inclusion.
Yeah. Now, Carol Sue Engelman is asking a very interesting question about how we heal the damage to self-worth. And she's referencing the root chakra, because much of what you both have been saying is the sustained attack on the self-worth of women for the variety of ways that they're women as they grow up and age. Speak to us about the healing process for that.
So I've been a therapist for 25, 30 years. And what I find is that what women need, first of all, is to tell their story and have it be received in a way that someone is witnessing it without judgment and without diminishing it. People have different levels of trauma, different extremes of trauma, but everyone's trauma and oppressive experience is true and needs to be spoken. So first of all, they need to witness it, which is speaking it or writing it. That's why the personal narrative, and that's why talk therapy is useful, because you get to say, this is what happened to me, and have someone say, wow, that happened to you. I'm really sorry. Or how was that for you? Or how do you feel about that? And then the process, bringing those things to the surface and validating in yourself something that's been so pushed down by oppression, to just say, oh, that actually did affect me. And then once it's got some fresh air on it, then there's the parsing through what parts of it can we let go of, knowing that this is an intergenerational trauma that I'm not going to solve by attacking someone, or this is an area of a trauma that the person's not going to apologize or make amends to me. And then doing the internal processing of healing, forgiving, letting go, claiming yourself back from those things. And as a therapist, I see what a stumbling block to that is when people, rather than letting it come up, experiencing it and letting it out in some way, they hold it as their new identity, a victim. And I don't mean this in a diminishing way, but like, I'm a victim of this. Like, I'm a victim of sexual abuse personally. And so I could keep that definition of myself my whole life, but instead I chose to process those feelings, the anger, the shame, the hurt, what it did to me, how it affected my life for years, how much I didn't remember when I was younger, and how it affected me later when I did remember. The whole process of it has to come up and out of us. And that takes some skilled container in order to do that. And it takes time. If we lock ourselves into the definition, though, we can't get to the liberated return to innocence, which is what we're shooting for in terms of healing. So yes, therapy, there's lots of kinds of things. Entheogenics, I think, are really fantastic for healing trauma. So people are doing all kinds of, psilocybin and other psychedelic kinds of things guided that are helpful in releasing those things from the unconscious, and getting into a community where you can be yourself and work your way through the things that defined you and work your way out of them and back to yourself. I think that's really an important thing for women, especially, to have that support. That's the short answer. That's the short answer.
Yeah. Well, just as a reminder, Mary Frances is doing a whole course on this, everyone, in January, that we'll talk about and over the next couple of days. But Kara, do you want to add anything to that about the healing process?
Well, yes. Well, I've worked with Mary Frances, and that's where I began to heal, because the things that she's speaking of, writing about my life, sharing it with someone who did not, very important, someone who's patient, someone who's kind, someone who didn't judge, like I was able to share anything, my deepest, darkest secrets, and then having them come up and owning them and healing them and releasing them. And like she was saying, like not keeping it as as this is who I am, this happened to me, this is who I am. even, I have to say, calling myself a lesbian is, I have to, there's the movement right now of people not identifying or identifying with being certain things. Like I'm me, I'm a spirit. I embody, a lot of different things. The main thing being love. And and it's just, I think the most important thing that I would say would be to, like Mary Frances said, share with a group or with someone who is not going to judge you, is going to be kind with the stuff that comes up, because it's painful and it's difficult, but you can heal. So
thank you for that. As we close, Mary Frances, why don't you say a word about tomorrow's session?
Sure. Well, I wanted to recognize that the different stages of aging have different experience. And so as myself and Cara were talking about our experience in my 50s and her 60s, like what it's like to be at this age of the eldering process. Tomorrow, Caitlin Adair, who wrote a book called Love's Body Speaks, and she wrote that back in the 70s, I think, and revisited it more recently. She has had some, so she is 73, and she has had some physical ailments and things that have happened to her that have impacted her sense of self and how that's affecting her in the beginnings of physical decline and what that is like. And then what are those ages where grandmother age and how much you're able to influence the next generation or the grandchildren generation, that kind of thing. So I find it interesting that as I have people in my life in those different categories, that it is a very different experience, being in your 50s, postmenopausal to 60s to 70s to 80s. And I think it's fascinating and important to delineate those things so we have a scaffolding for aging and what to expect and to prepare for. And then also how to overcome our fears about those things, including decline, illness, and death, in fact.
Thank you both so much. This has been a fascinating session, and I'm looking forward to your two sessions tomorrow and the day after, Mary Frances. And Cara, thank you for being so disclosive in such a compassionate way. One thing that I want to add before we close is a course that Ubiquity University and a number of partners are offering this week. This is Thanksgiving week in the United States. And as you probably all know, wherever you are in the world, that is followed by what they call Black Friday, and where people are encouraged to be mass consumers. So we're starting a slightly humorous, tongue-in-cheek campaign to reject the god of consumerism and return to the goddess of love. So we're initiating a Back to Freya Day, Freya. She was the goddess of love in the Scandinavian tradition, so that you can take about a dozen courses on different aspects of feminine spirituality and compassion in the world. So that's our Back to Freya Day campaign, and you can access it at just going to backtofreyaday.com. So we thought that would be an appropriate campaign, particularly when we're looking at the power of women, particularly the power of women as they mature and age. Thanks again, Mary Frances and Cara. That'll do it for us for today. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat Stan just put in, and we'll see you all again tomorrow, same time, same station, for the second of our 3-day program on the wisdom of the elder woman.